How do we reclaim half the work week for workers by removing the pain of all of those mundane tasks and automating them away so they can go focus on real work stuff?
Today on Builders is Pete Christothoulou. He's the CEO of AI startup Xembly. We discuss productivity issues in the workplace, which tasks are appropriate for AI to solve, and how Pete's evolved as the CEO. Before that is my weekly check-in with editor-in-chief of the Bee newsletter, Marty Beckerman, on the skills business leaders are looking for, a startup that regrows a body part, and what an organizational psychologist says about surveys. All right, once again, discussing three stories with editor-in-chief of the Bee newsletter, Marty Beckerman. Marty, how you doing?
I'm doing great, John. Great to be back.
Nice. Great to see you. So the first thing that you're covering I'm excited about is this survey that was conducted of 1,000 business professionals, asking them what skills their employees needed to invest in or needed to have. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So managers are overwhelmingly saying that the skill they want employees to have the most is AI, knowing how to use it, knowing how to incorporate it in their day-to-day duties. The only problem is that half of employees don't say they don't know what they're doing with AI, don't understand it. That's according to a LinkedIn study. So there's a disconnect between the skill bosses are looking for and that employees have. But sooner or later, the AI is just going to take all those employees' jobs anyway. So why bother?
Well, maybe not. I mean, what should employees do if they want to bone up on AI? Should they go back to school, or sort of what are their options?
There are high-level university programs. That's probably not necessary for most workers. Those are tens of thousands of dollars. But there are free and inexpensive resources for learning the basics from Google, from Amazon, LinkedIn Learning. And actually, Harvard University has a course people can watch for free. And for only a couple $100s, they can also get a certification if they pass a little test from Harvard, which would look great on their LinkedIn probably.
Yeah, no question about that. Surveys. You cover surveys in your newsletter too. How often, when you receive a survey from your employer, Marty, do you answer it?
Well, I always do everything my employer wants me to do, John. So I would say I fill out surveys a perfect amount.
I'll need to send you a survey about how often you fill out
Right.
surveys.
Send me a survey about my survey experience. How is my survey experience?
I will do that. Well, the interesting thing that I've found out is in best places to work surveys, actually the percentage of employees that fill one out is a really big criteria or a correlative factor to whether or not it's a good workplace to actually be a part of. So if you're an employer and you want your folks to fill out surveys more often, what should you do?
Right. Our organizational psychologist really dug into this week, bringing up a bunch of studies and research that shows what makes employees more likely to comply with survey requests. The most important things are to notify employees in advance to let them know the survey is coming. This has shown to really boost compliance. Make sure that the survey is easy to read, easy to understand, and even offering incentives, whether that's little gifts or free food and drink for completing it, can also boost compliance a lot.
All right. And then you cover a bunch of really interesting startups in the Bee newsletter. This one maybe takes the cake. It's a startup that if you lose your tooth, it envisions a future where you can get your tooth back without dentures. Maybe talk about this one and use the pun, please.
The molar, the merrier. Yes. This is out of Kyoto University in Japan. It's a startup based out of the university, and they have demonstrated in animals it is possible to regrow missing teeth. So the main purpose of this, some babies, their teeth never come in. This could help boost that, so they don't need artificial teeth. But they actually have found that when an adult loses a tooth, they still have a little tiny bit in the gum, and that this technology might be able to regrow that part. So whether you're a baby without their teeth or you just got knocked out in a bar fight, this is the startup for you.
All right. Well, we'll be rooting for them. As always, you can check these out at the B newsletter. And thanks, Marty. See you next week.
Thanks a lot, John.
I'm here with Pete Christothoulou, CEO of Xembly. Hey, Pete, how you doing?
John, so great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. We talked last year on the podcast about AI and productivity. And since then, the company Xembly is rapidly growing. I want to talk about that. And we were joking off air a second ago that was before, when we recorded our first podcast was before OpenAI was launched. And of course, the discussion around AI and all the chatter about has exploded. And I want to talk about that too. Maybe reorient the listeners, if you would. Like, what's the pain that Xembly is focused on solving, and what does the company do?
Sure. So Xembly is an AI automation assistant. Really what that means is we've taken the power of a very seasoned executive assistant and chief of staff and wrapped it into one holistic product that can help workers improve how they operate and companies also improve how they grow. The problem that we're solving is, I think impacts everybody. So a stat that I saw recently, which I still think is true, is that workers believe that 60% of their work week is unproductive. So if you look at your calendar and you think about how you spend your time, 60% of it is unproductive. And now they're also being asked to do more with less. And so, that's a problem that you could understand likely gets worse over time. And the reason they're unproductive, honestly, is because the productivity tools on the market have failed them. Like all these kind of technologies that are out there, all these products that are point solutions to help you manage your calendar better, or schedule a meeting, or even take notes, or track your tasks. Like all those things have kind of failed. And if you look at like what's going on in the workplace, the thing that we see is that work has become decentralized. You no longer work in like one thing. Like most companies have somewhere between 150 to 250 apps that they work across. Those silos have created distractions for workers. Now you have bells going off in every different system, Slack messages, Salesforce pings. It becomes like untenable for them. And what's happening underneath that is that even though these distractions are happening in these different systems and you don't want to pay attention to it, your team works across all these different systems, so you can't get away from it. And in order to be successful during the week, you have to have a workflow that connects to those different systems, number one, but more importantly, follows you across all the disjointed tasks that you have. So if you think about a week in the life of a worker, it looks something like this. An hour a week on scheduling and calendar management complexity. 30 minutes per meeting.
At least.
Yeah. 30 minutes per meeting to take notes, or if you have a note taker that you use to review the notes and make sure that they were good. Most people are supposed to take their customer conversations and put that data into Salesforce or HubSpot. So now they have to make sure that that information gets there and that all the records are appropriately tagged in the right way so their team is up to date. The reality is most people don't even do that. They say, I don't have the time to put that information there. Coming out of meetings, about 50% of the work commitments or the action items that people say they're going to complete aren't ever complete. They don't finish. And probably, John, when you look back on your week, you ask yourself, like, how can I make myself or that meeting more effective? How can my team spend their time better? The reality is, like, probably half of your meetings might not be effective, but you don't understand, like, where, how to improve them. And so really, like, all those things I just articulated are disjointed tasks that everyone deals with. And so the reason modern tools have failed is because they don't have context across all those tasks or live in the different information systems. And so the problem we're really trying to solve is how do we reclaim half the work week for workers by removing the pain of all of those mundane tasks and automating them away so they can go focus on real work stuff.
So let's give a couple of examples because, let me start here. You and I wanted to get together to talk. How did you actually schedule a meeting with me? Can you describe what you did?
Sure. I just added Xena and I said, Xena, schedule time with John. And Xena is a conversational AI that goes and works with the attendee, if it's external in this case, to schedule a time. So I don't need to send a link, say, John, look at my calendar. I think that's a little impersonal. I can just add Xena like I would had I had a real life EA, and it's handled perfectly in conversation. It takes me about 2 seconds to ask Xena to do that.
Yeah, so Xena sent me an email saying, asking me or with Xena CC'd. I responded saying some times that were open. And then did you respond or did Xena respond to my email?
No, Xena responds. I don't, at that point, I'm out of the conversation. I can see it. It's on email, but I'm assuming it gets, organized at the right time.
So we scheduled.
The reason that's important is because my day's, consumed with other meetings, different priorities. And while I may have time that looks available, I really don't want to meet at certain times. And so the system has a real understanding of me and is able to layer in a meeting based on, kind of my preferences of how I operate.
And so we talked, I recall this meeting and we talked about a few things. One thing I was going to do, one thing you were going to do. And Xena actually sent me a note saying schedule the time with Pete about the podcast. Yeah. So Xena actually was my EA too for this particular interaction. It was really cool. How is Xena kind of processing what happens in the meeting, because the notes and the action items were very on point? Yeah.
So first we call this closed loop, which is, you have meetings. The real goal in the meeting is not the conversation and back and forth. And John said this, then Pete said that, and they talked about, pricing or whatever it is we talk about. Like, that's not the interesting stuff. The interesting stuff is who committed to what and when does that thing due? And doing that with high precision consistently. So that's where we really specialize. And so going to the action item that you had, we really believed in closed loop workflows, which is people commit to something. Those items were then distributed to the right owners. And it's the product's job, just as if I had a great chief of staff, to go track it down and say, John, you said you're going to go do this. Make sure you get it done. Is it done or not? That's a really important part of the product, and we see it really helps teams improve what I'll call goal completion by up to 50%, because now the product's actually helping them kind of along the way. The way we think about the product, to your question, is really looking for what we call commitments to work. So what are the actionable commitments to work that were discussed during the meeting? Let me tell you what something that is not a commitment to work. John, if you and I, you're coming to Los Angeles and we want to go do something, have a good dinner, and we're like, oh, yeah, John, there's this really good Greek restaurant called Luca. Let's meet there on Friday. You're like, oh, yeah, cool. I'm going to see you there Friday. Well, that is not a commitment to work. It's an action item, but that's not a commitment to work. So we don't even include that in the back and forth of meeting notes because it's not relevant. Or in meetings, you may say something like, I'll get you that on Tuesday. That's how people speak in meetings. Their English isn't proper. They don't dereference pronouns. So Xembly's job is to figure out, who is I? That's Pete. Who are you? That's John. What is that? That's the slide deck we talked about. When is Tuesday? Well, that's Tuesday, October 23rd. That's the product. So we've really focused, hard and intently on uncovering commitments to work with very high precision. doesn't mean just getting the item right. It means not knowing what an action item is. So users then don't have 50 action items coming out of the meeting. And if we weren't good at that, the cascade of negative actions would be really bad. So now going back to the closed loop moment that we talked about, John, imagine we have a meeting and we have 10 action items, but 6 of them are irrelevant or not really the right things. Like we said it, but we really didn't mean it. Well, if that information is cascaded into Salesforce, and now there are tasks for everybody, and Zena's trying to follow up with you, that's at the point where it becomes annoying, and technology loses its power and isn't helpful. Actually, it's a nuisance. And so we work really hard at that core, what I'll call like high precision, high specialization of the task in order to help workers.
And so one more question about this. So I just had a meeting right before this podcast, a meeting with my team. And we were talking about strategy and having a discussion. And one of the things that occurred to me at the end of the meeting was like, what does the team think about the strategy? And what did the team think about the delivery of the strategy? Were they inspired? Were they not inspired? Whatever. How does Xena help with that? Or is that something that you're kind of actively developing against?
No, we do. There's 2 ways that we handle it. One, we can send out an anonymous feedback poll post-meeting. And you could have that set up for, one meeting. You could have it recurring. You customize it to like when and where you want it to ask. But you can ask, send out an anonymous poll, and it's up to the users to give feedback against the variables that you articulated. The other thing that we do for managers is we give them a data-driven outlook to improve not just like one event, but all their events. And so I'll tell you what we don't believe in. We don't believe in giving you things like sentiment from a meeting. How do people feel today? What's the mood of the meeting? Like it gets a little squishy and honestly like not actionable. You could look and feel like not amazing, but you're having like a very critical conversation that's important to have, and you're engaging differently. So the things that we tend to focus on are what are the elements that we can automatically like pull out of a conversation to give the leader insight into whether or not that was a good event and if they should keep doing it or not. So an example would be, how many action items do we capture on average from that meeting? Is it 1 or is it 7? If it's 1, is that really a good use of time? What's the cost of that meeting? Like how many people, how frequently, like how many hours, what's the dollar amount? How many people speak during the meeting on average? Is the meeting shared or not? And other variables. And so we take all this data and we organize it into like a meeting effectiveness index. And we'll say something like, hey, John, here's the effectiveness index for your team's meetings, not just yours, over the last month. So there's a bunch of data. We're not going to tell you that a meeting was good or bad. We're just giving you some information so you can have an open dialogue with your team and say, hey, here's some information we see. Let's go deeper. Should we be doing this still, not doing this? How should we change how we operate?
Yeah, I like using the metrics about what is said and the actual content of the meeting. I know that in some cases, I know that technology is kind of rating how much I make eye contact. But I look up and to the right when I think, and then sometimes when I'm like deep in thought, I look constipated, and even though I'm actively thinking. So a robot kind of like interpreting my facial expressions. I don't know that I love, but I do love the idea of understanding engagement, understanding satisfaction through hard data, hard feedback that folks are giving me and what's actually said in the conversation. Discussion of AI is everywhere. It's kind of like thinking back to our previous conversation. I don't think that we just said AI, but now there are ads during football games where Salesforce and other companies are AI's like the main message. Where do you feel like the media discussion or general discussion of AI is either misinformed, folks are getting it wrong? How do you think about this excitement with respect to quote unquote AI?
Yeah, really good question. First, I think we can all believe that AI will help us in amazing ways, and will do very powerful things. So, I think the consensus, and which I agree with, is that life can be better, and things will improve for us, and I'm hopeful for that. The thing I think that's being missed, and if we're not careful, I think we can get in a lot of trouble, is that AI will give rise to more silos, more data, more distractions, and will place even the greater demands on our time and attention. So, I talked about this earlier about our problem, like the real practical problems that plague workers, and even more challenges with AI. So, the world doesn't need an AI companion or co-pilot to summarize my Slack channels, or to gauge the mood of this conversation, or if I join a meeting late to recap the first 5 minutes, or to compose a message for chat that I want to send to you. Like those are like nice bells and whistles, like they're iterations, I'd say. And those iterations of like the products evolving actually can create more distraction for us. The world needs like a revolution that frees them of these tasks. And so, I think if I was to, we're all fans of history at some level. If I was to wind the clock back and I tell you, hey John, you and I fortunately worked together in the 90s. Hey John, the internet's going to be amazing. Do you know, imagine that you'll have a pocket computer that holds all the world's information, that allows you to connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime. Isn't that going to be amazing? And you would say, yes, we're going to be incredibly productive as a society. We'll be able to do more with less. Life's going to be good. Well, that happened. We have those things. I think the iPhone gives you the power of the Apollo 11 computer in your pocket now. Something ridiculous like that. What's also happened is we are so distracted. We're busier than ever. I think we're in something like the time that people meet is now double than what it was 20 years ago. We're more distracted than ever. And as I talked about earlier, we're working harder and we don't see as much for it. And so I think if we're not really careful, AI can take us further down that rat hole. And I think what you're going to see are companies, whether they're large or small, building AI bells and whistles to say they have something in AI, and not building products that are specialized, are precise, that work in the way that you want to work, that are available on demand, and actually truly automate for you. I think you're seeing the first revolution of cool products. I can do cool stuff with it. It's kind of like the first time you got on the internet, you could see a store. Now they have an online store. Isn't this cool? And I think it's going to take a year or two where you see the real companies start to separate and real power delivered.
I'd love you to share, if you can, what you're working on now at Xembly. I think it's tasks. I can't quite remember the word for it. And then also, are you taking on customers right now? Last time we chatted, you were kind of in a closed beta. Has that changed? What if someone hears this and wants to try Xembly?
Yeah, they can go to Xembly and we are testing our self-serve. So we've sold to the enterprise predominantly, with many companies that people have heard of, from Salesforce to Twilio, and other big companies like that. We are testing self-serve, meaning allowing anyone to come in and say, I want to try it. So if you hit our site at the right time, you may get the opportunity to do that. And if you don't do it immediately, in the next couple of weeks, it'll be there permanently. So yes, you can go sign up. The things that we're working on are really further specialization of the product. And so we built a compound product. In other words, it does many things. We've not built a point solution. And so the things that we're doing within the compound product are really trying to specialize against the practical skills that we've already created. So if you think about it, Xembly has 6 or 7 top level skills. We can schedule meetings and manage your calendar, and we can optimize your calendar and how you spend your time. We can capture your meeting notes, but importantly, like the action items. We can make sure that we manage your priorities or tasks. We call it Smart Task Manager really well. We can provide coaching. Like all those things are top level skills. But within each of those, we have hundreds of ways to use the product. So scheduling a meeting isn't just, hey, Zena, schedule a meeting with John. Like we need to be able to handle lots of ways that people speak. We need to be able to handle non-continuous date ranges, before or after, this date or that date. We need to be able to handle little things like, hey, schedule a meeting with John, but make Ziad optional, and even handle like multi, one-to-many meetings. So for example, for you, John, you could say something like, Zena, schedule a one-on-one with my team weekly for 30 minutes. So one to many. And so we're going like really, really deep in the skills that we have to uncover them as one. And the second, I'd say, is very deep on where Xembly is available. So we want to be kind of on demand, available in the tools that you operate in, whether that's Notion, Coda, Jira, Slack, HubSpot, wherever it is. Like we need to be available there. And then finally, it's just closing the loop on the tasks. So once you ask Zena to do something, it's not only done for that task, but the cascade of things that need to happen to really kind of round out the experience. In the same way, if you had a real live EA or chief of staff, like we can handle.
Pete, you mentioned we worked together in the 90s. I'm going to stipulate for the audience it was the late 90s. We're not that old, but I've known you for a long time, and also known you as a CEO. And I wanted to ask you, like, how are you different as a CEO compared to, say, 10 years ago when we were actively working together? And as you're thinking about the answer, I'll paint a picture for the audience. I might have walked into Pete's office, and he had an iPod. I think it was an iPod or something, like blasting In Excess. And Pete's got a t-shirt on right now if you're not watching on video, but you'd wear a tie, you dressed up. I look nicer than I do right now. You have artwork behind you. You had artwork back then too. So I'm ribbing you a little bit, but how are you different in general as a CEO than you were a decade ago?
Yeah, outside of appearance, I'm probably in better shape than I was.
Oh, okay.
So I'm taking better care of myself.
That's good.
Number one. But how am I different? I think it's a great question. So I've tried to have a growth mindset. Kind of is like the way I roll. And to do that, you have to be open to learning and being curious. I think that was harder for me when I was younger. I was a little bit more focused on my own opinion. And I would say strong opinions, strongly held. And I think, the way I've evolved, one, I've worked with amazing people. Like I've been really, really lucky. From the team that I have here, who you and I work with together, to you and many others. And I've gotten to learn, and I think I've gone from from strong opinions strongly held to strong opinions loosely held, and I've really tried to let the team guide a lot of what we do. I have, as I think about product, we're trying to combine what I'll call, very data-driven, customer-centric approach, overlaid with instinct. And the instinct part is really important, especially at the early stage. And so what I try to do is bring a little bit more of that into the conversations that we have, so people understand like where I think the product needs to be. And look, I talk to 50 customers a week, and I think that's something I didn't do before. I got a little bit consumed with what I call like the business of operating a business, and I'm of course consumed with that now, but in a different way. I'm very connected to, I think, what our customers are saying, how they feel, whether they're live or they're in their pipeline, and just trying to bring that information back to the team so we're making good decisions.
Yeah, that prompts a question for me, which is like how you make decisions. I mean, the way that I manage my calendar, manage my time, or try to be productive, I suspect is very personal to me. And we all have these personal things we're trying to solve for. But you're I don't know if that's true or not. That's just how what comes to mind. But you're trying to solve like a massive problem. And so how do you think about, with the limited resources you have, making the right decision about how to add a skill, or or whether your summary should be longer or shorter, those kinds of things?
Yeah, there's something freeing in our product that I've never had before, and that is we hear from customers every day in their voice what they want. So whether it's in Slack and they're asking Xena to do something, or it's an email and they're trying to execute, like connecting people. We have real-time feedback, and we know what people want and what we can support or can't support. So we have a naturally customer-guided view of the things that we need to work on. Number two, the way we connect with our customers and the way that we support them is it's real-time. So there's lots of technologies out there that now let you set up, what I call like real-time chat groups with your customers, whether it's Discord or Slack Connect or other. We have that type of real-time communication with our customers where we can field questions and also provide tips and see how people react to the tips. So I'd say we have 3 or 4 different channels that have ongoing customer communication that we're able to take and like inform what we do. The hard part is like the prioritization of it. So, I'd say most companies have a tough time figuring out like the sequence of what they should do. I think we don't have that anymore. Like we have that nailed. It becomes a little bit more challenging when you have to figure out like in what sequence is important, because everything is important. So that, like, as you know, there's no easy way around that except a good old fashioned team conversation to battle it out, which we still do.
Thanks so much, Pete, for joining me today.
John, good to see you.
Did you know that more than 20 million professionals and business owners visit business.com and Business News Daily? Why? It's the best place for resources, advice, and information about how to grow your business. And if your goal is to reach our audience, you should become one of our lead partners, sponsor a section of the site, or sponsor even this podcast. Reach us at business.com/connect. That's business.com/connect.